I know everyone sees the news of what is going on in the South and East China Sea with regard to China and their belligerence towards the Philippines, Taiwan, Vietnam, Malaysia, etc. And people start to wonder, why is China being like this? Why are they acting this way? And I rarely see the answer given when there's a report that discusses what is going on, probably because it would be a much longer report than they want to convey. But some people still have those questions, and I'm here to answer exactly what is going on here. So when it comes to China, they focus on what's called the first, second, and third island chain. So you have the first island chain, and that is this red line that runs basically through the South China Sea all the way up to the edge of Japan. And that is where China has a claim where they say it is their territory. Then you have the second island chain that moves out to Guam. This is where they want absolute, complete dominance of the seas. They want to be the overwhelming power here and be able to control whatever they want throughout this territory. And if you notice, there's U.S. bases here. You have bases in Guam, Japan, South Korea. What they don't show is the new base that's going to be built here in the Philippines, somewhere in this region right here. So that is what China wants in the near term. Well, that begs the question, what is the long-term goal and what is the third island chain? Well, the third island chain actually runs from Alaska all the way through Hawaii down to New Zealand. And China wants to be the most influential player in this part of the Pacific, leaving the remainder of the Pacific to the U.S., including Hawaii. So that's kind of where the third island chain discussion talks. This is where China wants to be the most dominant. They certainly don't have the capability, even, let's be honest, in the first island chain at this point, but that is what their ultimate goal is. Well, where does this stem from? Why do they say they have these claims? So I know this has a lot going on with it, but the line to focus on here is this red line that is China's claim. This line is based on an ancient, vague reference to Chinese exploration and led to what was called the 9-dash line. And the reason it was called the 9-dash line is simply because when they wrote this line, it had 9 dashes. And I don't know if this is 9, but if it is, that's awesome. But that's kind of why. There was 9 dashes on a map, and China says, this is ours, period. It's ours, and no one else can claim it. And so this red outline is now what China claims is their territorial waters. Well, this doesn't work in the modern international order. The current order discusses the economic exclusion zones, and these are the zones that countries have to harvest resources, whether it's minerals, fishing, whatever. And what happens is these countries have these zones, and they go about 230 miles, or I think 200 nautical miles off their coastlines. So traditionally, China and Vietnam would share the Gulf of Tonkin, but China's line would be something to this effect right here. That's essentially what it is. They would share the Taiwan Strait with Taiwan as a separate country, but they don't do that. When you look at the Vietnam line, you wonder, why is it bubbling out or bulging out like that? Well, Vietnam controls many islands that allows their exclusion zone to move outward. This is still considered international waters. That doesn't change that fact. But it just means they have the rights to conduct fishing, mining, etc. in these regions. As you notice, some of these countries cross over each other, like Brunei crosses over into Vietnam, into Malaysia. They just have deals that they can jointly use them. They work together. Same thing with Philippines and Vietnam right here in this little spot. The Spratly Islands, they have deals that they can jointly use those areas. Well, China and their giant red line is telling everyone anything in here no one gets to use but China, period. And that is why the Philippines has a beef with China, because around the Spratly Islands and other places, China is spraying Filipino ships with water or using the Chinese Coast Guard or their maritime militia to essentially badger the fishermen and the Coast Guard of the Philippines. And it was the Filipino government that said that the flashpoint probably isn't going to be Taiwan when it comes to China. The flashpoint is going to be the beef China has with all of these countries, the Philippines, Vietnam, and Malaysia specifically, when it comes to territorial waters and what countries can do in these territorial waters. So that is more of the concern, because China is exerting more of that influence. Well, in the meantime, China, understanding the international order here, is trying to build islands out in the middle of the South China Sea so that they can progressively push their economic exclusion zone further and further and further into other countries' zones as well, which somewhat undermines their own plans for the 9-line. It says they're basically using it as a backup, like, oh, if no one's going to recognize the 9-line, well, we're just going to build these islands out here, plant the Chinese flag, and then it automatically pushes our zone outward, and it's ours now. And that's kind of what they're looking at. The problem they're having is the islands they've built recently are now starting to sink because, lo and behold, man is not more powerful than Mother Nature and the oceans at this point. So that somewhat gives you the top-down reason for why China is acting the way they are when it comes to the Philippines, Vietnam, etc. Incidentally, their actions are driving countries like the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia more towards the Western-led order because it's more stable. It grants a modicum of equality here. You get your economic exclusion zone, you get your fishing rights, your mining rights, and China just doesn't get to take whatever it wants. So you see the Philippines making new deals with Australia. You see Vietnam and Japan coming together so that China can't realize their aspirations in the South China Sea of being absolutely dominant, and especially not realize their aspirations to move outward into the second island chain here and do whatever they want to the countries within this region. It's becoming increasingly difficult for China to exert this influence because most of these countries have become wise to it, so you don't see China as capable when it comes to trying to push through. The U.S. currently has 2 carrier strike groups, but you have to understand carrier strike groups, for as vast and big as they are, when it comes to a war-fighting machine, a naval force, is still a very, very minuscule spot in the vast South China Sea. So the U.S. can't be everywhere at once trying to secure freedom of navigation and freedom of the seas. And therefore, these other countries, they're trying to bolster their capability through alliances and through trade deals so that they can counter China and China's efforts to undermine the world order, the global order, and take whatever they want.